Psilocybin is not a medical treatment, and the clinics can't hold it. I said it, and I mean it. And if you stick around to the end, I think you'll get a better understanding why, and if you don't already, you might just come to agree with me. Welcome back, or welcome to my show. This is Eric Osborne, and this is the Eric Osborne Podcast. If you don't know, I have been working with psilocybin for 27 years. I originally approached this work from a therapeutic standpoint. I saw it like a medicine for the psyche. And while I still believe that there are elements of truth to that, over the years I have come to believe on such a deep level that this understanding is only the surface level. So first of all, I want to talk about why this is not going to fit within our current scientific paradigm. And I hope that you can believe me when I say that I love science. I got into mushrooms because of my love of science. My childhood, my dream was to be a herpetologist. I wanted to study reptiles and understand everything that made them what they were. That love evolved and became directed towards mushrooms, and for many, many years, I cultivated gourmet mushrooms and leaned upon the science heavily, and still do in a lot of ways. But sacred mushrooms, or psilocybin mushrooms, eventually very drastically shifted that perspective. It took some time. I have a pretty hard head. I experienced many things early on that defied explanation, that were counterintuitive to everything that science taught me, and yet I saw repeatedly outcomes, shared experiences with others that did not fit into the scientific or psychological framework. Where this really started to show up most apparently for me was working in Jamaica. Those of you who have been following my work for years, you know I started the world's first psilocybin mushroom retreat in Treasure Beach, Jamaica in 2013. And there I went into it with a very almost clinical perspective. Now, I've always preferred to have these experiences outdoors, and I still believe that is the best setting possible for them, as long as you're in a safe, secure space. But what really started to come to light in Jamaica for me was I hesitate to use the word paranormal. Transpersonal maybe is a better, but it even goes beyond that. And fortunately, there is a growing conversation, thanks to scientists who are studying these phenomena, particularly with DMT, and understanding that, as a matter of fact, we do live in a world that is embedded in a spiritual world, just to say it. So the current scientific paradigm that we are living under, most are probably not really aware of this, is what's actually called scientism. You see, science is questioning, exploration. It is doubting of our understanding. Scientific theories come about not just because we're curious about the world, but because we're trying to disprove our working theory. That is the premise of science. True science is never trying to prove itself right. It's actually trying to prove itself wrong to get to what is actually right. And we've seen a drastic shift in the last maybe 2-3 decades. It's been gradual, but it seems to have really come to a head in the last 10 years or so, where scientism, which is more like the religion of science, has overtaken the popular notion of what science is. And the scientism always believes it's right. Scientism is full of slogans like trust the science. Science doesn't even trust itself. That's the point. Science is always trying to prove itself wrong to get to what is right. So anytime I hear a blanket statement from a scientist this is what it is, then I know we're actually dealing with scientism. Because a real scientist will present something as a theory or a hypothesis. This is what we think is happening, not this is what is happening. And so we see this in the world of psychedelics quite plainly. There is a well-known psychedelic scientist who is publishing a book soon, if it hasn't already come out, called How Psychedelics Work. This is peak scientism in my mind as it relates to psychedelics, because first and foremost, we do not understand how the brain works. We know the psychedelics function within the brain, have an impact upon the human neurological system, but that is not confined to the brain either. So how psychedelics work is far from being understood, and likely will never be completely understood, because we'll probably never completely understand the human being, at least not as long as we continue to approach it from a materialist scientific standpoint. It's kind of absurd, really, when you start to think about it. The fact that we have questionnaires for people to fill out about their mystical nature of their psychedelic experience. Like the center of the mystical experience is being ineffable. So once we try to define it, once we try to describe it, we are moving away from the actual experience itself. I laugh when I imagine the researchers with clipboards studying someone as they journey on a psychedelic experience. And now this is not to say that I don't value research. There's a ton of incredible information that's coming out around psychedelics, just around our life in general. Research it's essential. We need to understand better the world in which we live. And yet, when couched in the framework of scientism, it is exceedingly limited, because it believes that the conclusion is the final say, when it is clearly not. So thinking about psychedelics being studied from a clipboard is one of the most comical visualizations that I personally have here. And I don't say this in any attempt to try to discredit the researchers or the scientists. I feel like I have to say this over and over, because our culture gets really defensive when we start to question the current paradigm. I mean, that's what all cultures do. We never like to have the paradigm questioned, because it is our framework. However, this one, it's well timed to begin questioning it. We've seen on a pretty large scale what happens when we believe slogans, when we just take something at face value, hand over our rights, and end up imprisoned by the ideologies that we thought were supposed to be protecting us or freeing us. Kind of a peak example of this is when a research company, a pharmaceutical company I won't name, attempted to patent soft chairs and basically elevator music for psychedelic experiences. That is such a prime example of what scientism, what the dogmatic ways of approaching something that cannot be contained try to do. Let's patent it. Let's put it in a box. Let's make it something that we can generate proprietary information around, and then it is ours alone. And that is the antithesis of how psychedelics work. These, particularly mushrooms, are ubiquitous in nature. You know, when we were helping Oregon develop attempt to develop a religious use carve out for its 109 measure, it became painfully apparent to me that the intention was not actually to open up access. The intention was to regulate access to only clinical medical approaches. They ended up not permitting any kind of religious or ceremonial use with psilocybin, despite that being the entirety of its history until the last 30 to 50 years. Even that, it's been Schedule 1 since the 70s, right? So within that 50-year period that there was any attempt to incorporate psilocybin into a Western use model, it was illegal to do so. It was illegal to explore even for medical purposes. Now, they obviously have medical benefits. I have seen incredible outcomes working with people over the years. I have seen aphasias reversed, people who had a lesion in their brain where they were losing their speech. I've seen that reversed. I have seen countless cases of depression and anxiety and PTSD find relief that they could not find from other pharmaceuticals. But just because something has a medical benefit doesn't mean that it purely functions as a medicine. I mean, look in your kitchen cabinet. What kind of foods do you have there that have profound medical applications? But we don't necessarily consider them medicines. Now, what really makes psilocybin and other psychedelics, and I generally tend to refer to plant-based psychedelics when I'm talking here, although I do recognize incredible value in synthetic compounds like LSD, MDMA, which is not a psychedelic, okay, just to clarify that. But what we find here is that these psychoactive plants that we are attempting to lump into medicines are really more like a supplement. They're really more like, I wouldn't go so far as to say food, because 5 dry grams of psilocybin is quite enough for most people, and that is not enough for a meal. But when you compare it to a supplement, that is the closest, at least quasi-medical interpretation that we have. Now, what kind of a supplement is it? I think that is a question that really deserves some exploration, because for me, over the years, I did perceive this originally as a mental health therapeutic, like a supplement for the brain. And again, it can work in that way, but it's not limited to that use case. As a matter of fact, what we're starting to see is that the mental health benefits, the therapeutic outcomes, are downstream of spiritual, mystical experiences. Remember that clipboard I was talking about, that ineffable state that we find ourselves in within psychedelics? That is actually where the healing happens, where the growth happens. Now, that realm is one that we will spend much more time talking about. And I will say that I'm actually grateful and feel empowered to speak about this because of scientists such as, like I said, thanks to researchers like Danny Goler, who is doing some incredible work with extended state DMT, we're starting to come to understand, yes, these experiences are true. They are not just aberrations of the psyche. They're not just remnants of some Jungian archetype. No, there actually is a world far beyond ours that we can learn to understand. And once our science, is starting to move beyond this framework of scientism, where we do explore the possibility of these other realms and these other beings, then the research itself will advance so much more quickly. Why does this matter? Who cares? Why does the average person need to understand this? Well, when we're working with these compounds, one of the most challenging aspects as a space holder, and I've sat with thousands of doses, well over 1,000 people, probably around 1,500 people I've sat with right now. Most of those people had at least 3 experiences. So I've sat with literally thousands of doses. And the overwhelming majority of those individuals came to psilocybin because they were exploring it as a mental health treatment. Now, there is not a thing wrong with that. Psilocybin has been incredible for my mental health. As I said, I've witnessed it do wonders for others as well. But the challenge lies in attempting to interpret these experiences through the lens of Western medicine. I'm writing a book that I'm very excited to be sharing with you all. It is going to be coming out hopefully in September. It will be self-published, so I will need your help in spreading the word. I will have a link in the show notes where you can sign up for an email list to be notified as excerpts come out or the full publication itself. And in this book, I tell many, many stories of individuals who had experiences that defied any explanation, that defied any framework they had existing. And for many of them, it was a challenge to incorporate that into what they had been told through, let's just say, therapeutic sources. Like, now, I really want it to be clear that I'm not attempting to discredit writers like Michael Pollan. I think that they have done incredible work for spreading the message of psychedelics and helping to normalize psychedelics. But because they're writing within this context of what I call scientism, they're not able to explain or explore the subject in the depth and the authenticity that it really deserves. Now, maybe Michael Pollan didn't have a meeting with the mantids. Maybe he didn't encounter the Divine Mother. But these are all things that I have supported others work through when they came expecting a life review, when they came expecting maybe a glorified version of talk therapy. And that is so far from what this work is. And the truth of the matter is that when people come to the mushroom with the understanding that this is first and foremost a metaphysical, spiritual experience, then they will receive more value and benefit from the experience itself. It is not always otherworldly. Very often it is a deep life reflection, and very often it is much more than that. In the book, I go through a number of experiences that clearly could not be contained within the walls of a clinic. And having worked with clinicians over the years, I have had the privilege of hearing stories of psychedelic experiences that physically could not be contained by the clinic, that individuals became paranoid where they were, they felt trapped, and they attempted to break out. Some of them actually did. And so over the years, as I have worked in an enormous variety of settings with these tools, I have unequivocally found that being in nature is by far the safest and best setting. Now, you can look at this from a number of angles. The openness, the expansiveness of being in the natural world provides a better container or better mindset going into an expansive experience like this. When we are open to expanding our awareness of the interconnectivity of all life, then being in the natural world truly facilitates that. I have a profound experience that I'll share with you now that's also included in the book. It's the introduction to the book, and that is of working with Welby Winstead. In my work, I've had the great fortune of working with a number of folks who were at the end of their lives, and Welby was one of those. And Welby was really unique in that he, in the 80s, so he was one of the first black surgeons in Kentucky. He was unique in that. But in the 80s, he went to Peru when nobody else was going to Peru from the States, and had an ayahuasca experience. He had read about it somehow. I forgot how he got wind of it, but he ended up finding himself in Peru, experiencing ayahuasca, was profoundly affected by it, thought it was the spiritual technology that the world needed, and wanted to introduce it to his practice. He was at that time he was in medical school at Johns Hopkins, and he proposed to Johns Hopkins to bring ayahuasca under study, and they refused, understandably, in the 80s. So he kind of put that aside and went into eye surgery. Yeah, he was an eye surgeon. Fast forward years later, he found Psanctuary, the church that my wife and I founded, and began to get involved with us through that, and subsequently was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. When he received this diagnosis, one of the first things he wanted to do was work with psilocybin to get to come to terms with the fact that he was leaving this world. And I sat with him and his lover, wasn't a wife, but they had been together for several years. I sat with them out in the countryside here in Kentucky under a blue sky mottled with big fluffy clouds, and it was a daytime experience. And there was a certain point where Welby was laid back on the patio where he was having his experience, and he said to his wife or his partner, he said something to the nature of, to paraphrase him, like, we're just like those clouds. We're just like those clouds we see above us there, baby. We come and we go. We're never meant to stay, but my God, how beautiful it is when we're here. And that was a profoundly therapeutic experience for him. It wasn't deeply mystical. It wasn't otherworldly. It was a modest dose on a gentle afternoon. But just having those clouds floating by provided him and his partner with this powerful metaphor and connection to the natural world that in that moment and beyond brought each of them profound relief. Now, could he have found that relief in a clinic? Maybe, but probably not. The last time we ate mushrooms together twice, and the last time was on his deathbed. This is the first and only time so far that I've had the privilege of this experience, but just a few days before he died, we consumed mushrooms together while he was sitting on his hospital bed in his home. And it was a worthwhile experience, but be it the setting, be it the mindset, it did not have anywhere near the profundity that the first experience did. I also had the privilege of sharing DMT with Welby, which was likewise a profound, deep experience. And after coming out of that state, he just breathed a sigh of relief and said, we don't have anything to be afraid of. We don't have anything to be afraid of. It's absolutely beautiful over there, and we have nothing to fear. That too was held in a non-clinical environment in the comfort of his home, surrounded by enormous plants and his own ganja plants. He was a indoor cannabis grower, a really unique individual. And he said that working with psychedelics was the only thing that made his living experience of dying worthwhile. Now, again, we talk about this in a medical therapeutic standpoint. It has medical and therapeutic value, but it is the spiritual, mystical nature that provides the therapeutic value. So, if that is the case, then the therapy of the traditional therapeutic container is not the most appropriate one. This is why we ultimately founded Sanctuary Church, because after years of working with these sacred mushrooms in a semi-therapeutic environment, we found that there was something enormous missing from this work. And this is the key right here. This is the core component to lasting growth and true spiritual work. Community. Now, I've worked with a number of high performers, business people who require anonymity, understandably so. I'm happy to do that work and support folks through that. You can look into my website if you're interested in that service. Even still, I am going to always advocate for a communal container, if not during the actual session itself, afterwards. Now, that community can be of varying sizes. It can be purely online, as much of our sanctuary community is. It can be just your close core group of people. But if you do not have individuals who you can process this with long term, and even more importantly, individuals who you can have shared accountability with, then you are going to lose an enormous amount of the benefit. One of the things that we see in Psanctuary that has been the most surprising for me, though in retrospect now it's not, is that the container of community begins the healing process before someone even consumes the mushroom. I have worked with a number of folks within that community who have never consumed psilocybin, and yet in their preparation time, a month, 6 months, some up to a year, prior to actually having that first ceremony, they spent a lot of time engaged with the community. And invariably, those who receive the most benefit of their initial session and the ongoing integration are those who engage with community consciously. I can think of a couple of individuals that come to mind right now that I won't name, but I have been so impressed with how they have just dove headfirst into community. And most of these people, it's interesting to note, are also participants in 12-step programs where you learn the power of community as well. Most of those people who have engaged in the community prior to their experience have had extremely profound first experiences. And that's not because they're getting front loaded with others' interpretations or understandings of the mushroom space. It's because they are in the field, the energetic field of those who have been doing this work. So there is an unconscious understanding of not only how the process will unfold in the midst of the ceremony, but how their conscientious preparation and post-ceremony integration plays such a vital role in their growth and well-being. It's a necessary component. It is absolutely incapable of existing within the clinical modality. This is why 12-step programs are so profoundly helpful, is because they happen within the context of community, and they have that shared accountability and not necessarily perspective, but I want to say framework. That's probably the better way to look at it. Even still, understandably so, we get a lot of pushback when we talk about this from a spiritual, or dare I say even religious perspective. I don't want to say victim, but I have been subject to a fair amount of religious trauma. It was the furthest thing from my mind to ever consider forming a religious church community around sacred mushrooms. But the longer you do this work, the longer you work with what I now understand as a sacrament, the longer you work with the mushroom, the more you understand that the power it has for building community, for exposing us to deep spiritual understandings that are only found in esoteric traditions, and the ability for the mushroom to bring about shifts in us that defy language and yet yield physical, mental, spiritual results, that this experience best fits into a spiritual practice. And that's the last part that I want to talk about that is so important here. And it's another reason why community is so valuable. It is a piece of this work that I didn't put enough emphasis on early on, and I didn't understand well enough in my own journey how to apply it. And that is of an intentional personal growth, or even spiritual practice, spiritual growth practice. There is, I believe, some misinformation being presented around psilocybin and other psychedelics, and that they Again, coming from this clinical perspective that they are a medicine that you take that will then alter your perspective or alter your brain chemistry and fix things. That is not the case. Of the thousands of doses that I've administered, maybe 2 people had real lasting change without any ongoing intentional developmental work. And I can only say that that lasted. When I say lasting, that was only like a couple of years. The overwhelming majority of people who I've worked with over the years, if they have immediate relief and they do not intentionally work with a spiritual or personal growth practice, the benefits stick around for 3 months, maybe 6 months tops. Life is hard. We will constantly be facing opportunities to go back into old ways of being and thinking, old pathways, old perspectives. These powerful sacraments can provide us insight into other worlds, deeper knowledge, better ways of being, but we have to have a devoted practice to make those changes stick. And the beautiful thing about it is it doesn't matter what that mode or method is. It can be Buddhism, it can be Catholicism, it can be agnosticism. All it simply requires is that you understand that there is a world beyond ours. If you're not able to hold that, well, then you're not going to be able to hold on to much of the value from these experiences. Maria Sabina, who is a wonderful human being that introduced sacred mushrooms to the wider world. If you don't know her, please look her up. Also, just a side note, on July 22nd, which is her birthday, we will be promoting a worldwide dose day where you can microdose or macrodose just to be a part of that experience and event with us in honor of Maria Sabina. But one of her famous quotes is that there is a world beyond ours, and the mushroom takes us by the hand and shows us that other world. Dismissing that other world is to dismiss all of the value that these experiences can and should bring into our lives. So we have the Constitution. Here we are in the 250th anniversary of America's birth this month. We just passed up July 4th. Our Constitution is one of the only in the world that provides us with protection for our unique and personal religious practice. This freedom is what we have leveraged at Psanctuary, not only because it is an actual right of ours to work with these mushrooms as a sacrament, but because that they are best applied in the sacramental framework. And while I understand the challenges that can arise when considering a religious approach to this work, I am exceedingly confident that as time goes on, we will see that that is the legitimate approach. If we have researchers finally moving into studying the entities within the DMT space and speaking to them as they relate to biblical, I don't want to say archetypes, I want to actually say beings, or beings that have been described only through esoteric spiritual traditions like Buddhism and Taoism, Hinduism, then there is something there for us to explore. Materialism has only gotten us so far, and it will only get us so far. There's so much more to this world. You are so much more than just a physical body. Please don't call yourself a meat sack. You're not. You are an incredible quantum machine, a computer, a processor, a spiritual being that transcends space and time. And so working with these sacraments with that mindset allows you to take your healing further, to take your growth further, to be more of what you're actually meant to be. The mushrooms are not seeking patients. They're not seeking someone to work on. Mushrooms are seeking participants. They exemplify this throughout nature. The symbiotic relationship of fungi, the saprophytic function of fungi that share nutrients between various species, that turn decaying waste to nutritious soil. That's all also happening with you. You can look at it as a metaphor, or you can look at it as a function. That's how I perceive to see it. This is how they work. They can help renew our spirit, renew our mind and our body by recycling and regenerating the old waste material. Thank you for joining me. This is a conversation that I will be having more and more as the need arises. We have a need to speak to mushrooms and psychedelics from the spiritual perspective. I was encouraged when I started this new podcast and approach to not speak of psilocybin as a spiritual technology, to strictly speak of it as a therapeutic in order to try to bring more people in. And that is inauthentic to who I am. And it is of the utmost importance that I be authentic with you. That's what the mushrooms have taught me. That's what my spiritual studies teach me. And that's what I want to encourage you to do as well. Thank you so much for joining. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. If you made it this far, then you really want to subscribe because you're deeply appreciated. And I want to make sure you get notified on the next video or whatever offering arises. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.